Picture a rotting carcass baking in the relentless sun. You might imagine the overwhelming stench of decay. The hot wind carries a foul odor across the dry savanna grass, warning every creature to stay away. Death has claimed this space. Why would any living creature willingly plunge its head into this toxic nightmare? For millions of years, this horrific scene was not a tragedy to be avoided. It was a grand feast. This absolute horror show of rotting meat is crawling with invisible biological weapons. If you consumed even a fraction of an ounce of this flesh, your nervous system would begin to shut down within hours. Your organs would fail, and your life would end in agonizing pain. Yet, the vulture survives. How can an animal eat a diet composed entirely of lethal toxins and walk away completely unharmed? To understand this impossible feat, you have to travel back in time. Imagine the Earth 2.5 million years ago, during the Pleistocene epoch. The landscape was teeming with massive megafauna, from giant ground sloths to towering mammoths. Apex predators like saber-toothed cats were hunting these giants, leaving massive, half-eaten carcasses scattered across the landscape. This was a world of brutal competition. Finding fresh food required massive expenditures of energy, and starvation was the most common cause of death. But there was a loophole in this ruthless system. What if an animal could learn to eat the food that no other creature dared to touch? The rotting meat was plentiful, completely free, and unguarded. There was just one massive barrier to entry. The meat was loaded with microscopic assassins. When an animal dies, its immune system immediately ceases to function. Within minutes, the bacteria that normally live peacefully in the animal's gut begin to devour the body from the inside out. They multiply exponentially in the heat. As they consume the tissue, they produce highly toxic waste products. Could you imagine eating a meal laced with millions of microscopic poison factories? One of these poisons is botulinum toxin, the cause of botulism. It is widely considered the most toxic naturally occurring substance on planet Earth. A dose smaller than a single grain of sand is enough to kill a massive mammal. The toxin works by blocking the signals from your nerves to your muscles. It paralyzes the body, eventually stopping the lungs from drawing in air. In the wild savanna, a carcass baking in the 90-degree Fahrenheit heat becomes a perfect breeding ground for this deadly neurotoxin. Any normal scavenger that takes a bite is signing its own death warrant. Then there is anthrax. The anthrax bacteria form nearly indestructible spores when they are exposed to the outside air. These spores can survive in the harsh, dry soil for decades, just waiting for a host to disturb them. When grazing animals accidentally inhale or ingest these invisible spores, the bacteria awaken and multiply rapidly in the bloodstream. The disease is swift and utterly ruthless. The animal collapses and dies, its blood pooling on the earth, releasing billions of new spores into the surrounding environment. Why does this microscopic killer not wipe out every scavenger in the entire ecosystem? Enter the vulture, nature's most highly specialized biological incinerator. Over millions of years of evolution, vultures developed a digestive tract that defies all logic. Their survival strategy is built on a sequence of extreme physiological defenses. The first line of defense begins before the rotting food even reaches their stomach. Vultures completely lack feathers on their heads and necks. This might seem like a strange aesthetic choice, but it is a critical survival tool. When a vulture plunges its head deep into the bloody, rotting cavity of a dead buffalo, bacteria inevitably coat its skin. If it had feathers, those feathers would trap the blood and bacteria, creating a permanent, festering infection hazard. Instead, the bare skin allows the intense ultraviolet radiation from the sun to bake the flesh, actively sterilizing the bird's head. But the true magic and the absolute terror of the vulture's anatomy lies deep within its core. When the vulture swallows a massive chunk of infected meat, it travels down the esophagus and enters a highly specialized stomach. This stomach is not just a digestive organ, it is a chemical weapon of mass destruction. The gastric acid inside a vulture's stomach is fundamentally different from anything found in a human or a pet dog. Do you know how acidic your own stomach is? A normal human stomach maintains an acidity level of around 1.5 to 3. This is acidic enough to break down a cheeseburger or a piece of cooked chicken. A vulture's stomach, however, has an acidity level that hovers around 0.1. To put that extreme number into perspective, battery acid has an acidity level of roughly 0.8. The liquid sloshing around inside a vulture's stomach is significantly more corrosive than the acid inside a car battery. It is so highly concentrated that it can easily dissolve solid bone, tough leather, and even some metals within a matter of hours. When the rotting, disease-ridden meat hits this bubbling pool of extreme acid, total biological annihilation occurs. The harsh chemical environment rapidly denatures the proteins of most viruses and bacteria. The deadly rabies virus is destroyed instantly. The aggressive cholera bacteria are melted away into nothing. The acid physically tears apart the protective cell walls of these pathogens, turning them into harmless, easily digestible protein soup. It is so destructive that it even breaks down the DNA of the prey, leaving almost no genetic trace behind. But this is only the beginning of the story. The acid is unimaginably powerful, but it is not entirely perfect. A few years ago, a team of evolutionary biologists from the University of Copenhagen set out to map the invisible world inside these magnificent birds. In 2014, a groundbreaking study led by researcher Michael Roggenbuck and his team completely changed the scientific understanding of animal digestion. They painstakingly gathered DNA samples from the digestive tracts of 50 black vultures and turkey vultures. They wanted to see exactly what biological material was surviving that horrifying bath of battery acid. When they sequenced the genetic data, they found something that completely defied their initial expectations. The stomach acid was doing its heavy lifting, wiping out hundreds of different types of environmental bacteria found on the rotting meat, but a select few pathogens were actually surviving the chemical onslaught. The researchers discovered massive, thriving colonies of two specific types of lethal bacteria dominating the vulture's large intestine. The first was Clostridia, the exact family of bacteria responsible for severe food poisoning, tetanus, and the paralyzing terror of botulism. The second was Fusobacteria, a notorious group of flesh-eating bacteria that causes severe, rotting infections in mammalian wounds. How could the most dangerous pathogens on Earth not only survive the acid, but actively colonize the bird's lower intestines? This leads to the most paradoxical twist in the history of evolutionary biology. The vulture has not merely learned to tolerate these deadly diseases, it has actively recruited them. The vulture's immune system is incredibly robust, producing unique, specialized antibodies that strictly prevent these specific bacteria from crossing the intestinal wall and entering the bird's bloodstream. The bird holds the dangerous pathogens completely captive within the highly controlled environment of its lower gut. Because the extreme stomach acid wiped out all the weak, competing bacteria higher up in the digestive tract, the deadly Clostridia and Fusobacteria have the entire large intestine to themselves. They multiply rapidly, creating a dense, toxic jungle of microscopic life. But why would the vulture allow this terrifying occupation? Why harbor an army of flesh-eating bacteria inside your own body? The answer lies in the ultimate survival strategy for a strict scavenger. Vultures often eat incredibly tough, leathery meat, thick cartilage, and dense bone that is incredibly difficult to digest. Even with a stomach full of battery acid, the deadly bacteria that survive the stomach are undisputed experts at one specific biological task. They break down dead flesh. The vulture allows these flesh-eating bacteria to live in its gut because the bacteria act as a mercenary digestive workforce. They secrete highly powerful enzymes that continue to dissolve the tough animal tissue that the vulture's own body could not fully process. The bird is essentially using the pathogen's highly destructive nature to extract every last drop of nutrition from the carcass. It is a dangerous, brilliant alliance with death itself, brokered over millions of years of evolution. Picture the wild savanna once again. A massive wildebeest has died of anthrax, and its heavy body has been baking in the scorching heat for 4 days. The carcass is swelling dangerously with toxic gases. Hungry lions walk past it, catching the foul scent on the breeze and turning away in utter disgust. Scavenging hyenas sniff the air but quickly decide the biological risk is far too high. The body is a ticking time bomb of disease, threatening to deeply infect the soil and spread a deadly plague across the entire plain. Then, the shadows begin to fall over the dry grass. A flock of white-backed vultures descends from the thermal updrafts thousands of feet above the earth. They rely on incredibly sharp vision to spot death from miles away, watching the subtle movements of eagles on the horizon to pinpoint the exact location. They do not see a biological hazard. They see a golden opportunity. They crowd tightly around the carcass, their bald heads plunging deep into the highly infected tissue. They rip away the rotting flesh with their razor-sharp, hooked beaks. They gorge themselves relentlessly, eating up to 20% of their own body weight in a single, frenzied sitting. In less than 30 minutes, the bloated, disease-ridden carcass is completely stripped, reduced to nothing but clean, white bones scattered in the dust. The ticking time bomb has been completely diffused. As they finish eating, the vultures regularly exhibit another bizarre and somewhat revolting behavior. They defecate and urinate directly onto their own legs. This strange process is known scientifically as urohydrosis. While it might look deeply disgusting to an observer, it serves two absolutely vital survival purposes. First, as the liquid rapidly evaporates in the hot sun, it drastically cools the birds down, acting exactly like a built-in air conditioning system. Second, the vulture's waste is highly acidic and heavily concentrated with potent uric acid. As this liquid completely coats their bare legs, it acts as a powerful, natural antibacterial wash. It instantly kills any deadly pathogens they might have picked up while tramping through the rotting blood and contaminated guts of their meal. Every single aspect of their biology, from head to claw, is a weapon against disease. This exposes the hidden genius of the natural world. Vultures are not the grim reapers of the savanna, bringing death and despair wherever they fly. They are the ultimate biological purifiers. They are the silent, unappreciated sanitation workers of the wild ecosystem. By purposely consuming the most toxic, diseased meat on the planet, they instantly break the chain of infection. They prevent anthrax, rabies, and botulism from seeping into the groundwater and wiping out entire herds of grazing animals. Without vultures constantly cleaning the landscape, the delicate balance of the ecosystem would collapse completely, and disease would run rampant across the animal kingdom. Now, think about the modern world surrounding you. When you look up and see a turkey vulture circling lazily high above the highway, slowly scanning the hot asphalt for roadkill, you might feel a sudden sense of unease. You might quickly view them as morbid creatures, obsessed with decay and tragedy. But you are actually looking at one of the most sophisticated, highly evolved biological survival machines on planet Earth. They are not drawn to the tragedy of death at all. They are drawn to the biological puzzle that only they have the power to solve. Picture that rotting carcass baking in the relentless sun one last time. You might imagine the overwhelming stench of decay and the terrifying shadow of death hanging over the earth. But for the vulture, it is just another day at the office, effortlessly turning a toxic nightmare into the perfect meal. If you want to keep decoding the brutal, beautiful, and utterly bizarre secrets of the animal world, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Leave a comment below sharing which animal survival tactic needs to be decoded next. Until then, keep watching the skies, and never underestimate the power of evolution.